Yeah, let's get into human mating.
Yes, very interesting topic.
Yes. So maybe you can just give a quick summary of how you see. Cheers. Of how does it work from your perspective?
Right, I've got to get my head around it. I've
Yeah.
reread the paper recently to make sure I know what I'm talking about here. Right. What's the best entry point to this? The assumption has always been that pair bonding, what we culturally encoded as marriage, is about the imposition of the male patriarchy on women. That is that males are
Wait.
taking what's
Sorry.
called proprietary.
Sorry. Can you try to do it the most boring way possible without any lashing outs on feminism and patriarchy and stuff like that? Just like a
No,
really
no,
dry scientific
this is
understanding.
no, this is what most scientists still
Okay.
think, right?
Okay.
The assumption, including within science, is that human pair bonding is about male proprietorial control of female fertility. It's nothing of the sort. It's the exact inverse, right? The reason why you have women want to pair bond is because they're interested in mating with males in order to have children who've got the highest possible genomic integrity. That is, relatively speaking, to other kids, other males, a low proportion of deleterious genetic material. So obviously that means they're going to function right. They're going to in turn reproduce. So ultimately, in the long term, their reproductive output, in terms of quantity times quality, is high. Right. Now, the way to do that is if you're a female, your peak age of reproductive attractiveness is actually 14 to 19. So ideally, when you're about 18, you want to nail down a male of as high a genomic integrity as possible to have a series of offspring with, right? Because your mate value as a female falls off a cliff after age about 20. So if you were typically mate promiscuously, there's no such thing as pair bonding. Then after each child, and of course having a child itself denudes you of sexual attractiveness, your prospects of finding a partner of high genomic equality gradually go down. So the quality of your offspring will tail off rapidly over time. If instead you pair bond with the best male you can find at, say, age 18 or age 20, and have a series of offspring with him, then that maximizes your reproductive output in terms of quality times quantity, right? Now, also, obviously, all females, even in polygynous societies, are not going to wind up with the males that they want. They're going to have to settle for males of less quality, right? But they can have extra pair sex outside the pair bond with males who are of significantly higher mate value than their pair bond partners, right? So this is another misunderstanding by the science community. What's termed mate guarding by the male, again, is nothing of the kind. They're actually acting as bodyguard on behalf of the female to keep away all the riffraff, all the low mate value males. But they don't stop either the female being perceptive or other males approaching that female or of higher status in order to have extra pair sex. The female wins everywhere you look at it, right? So pair bonding is firmly in the female interest, not the male interest. But obviously, males have to go along with it, otherwise, they end up with no sex. Males can't be just promiscuous because the chances of getting promiscuous sex is a lot lower than getting sex in a pair bond because of the quality criteria female impose on males for extra pair sex. So if you're not a male of high quality and can have several wives in polygamy, then you're scrambling around for a monogamous relationship. And of course, there is a high chance you'll end up just as a bachelor with no partner and no sex at all. And we know from phylogenetic DNA analysis of the past that only 40% of males ever reproduced. And of that 40%, the vast majority of reproduction was a very narrow band of particularly high status alpha males. So there's a massive reproductive skew amongst males. Again, there's nothing we can do about that. That is a male intersexual power issue, nothing to do with feminism or MRAs, and that's just the reality. So that's the situation in mating. So the incels talk about, and there's some truth to what they talk about,
Wait,
this 80-20 thing.
sorry, before we go there, and we will go there, I
Yeah.
promise.
Yeah.
So where does monogamy come into play? It seems like we have lived in, I mean, the last, I don't know, you know it probably better than I do, but the last, I don't know how many thousand years, we've lived in monogamous pair bonds, right? It's not this polygynous.
False. False. 85% of societies, even today, have formal polygamy. It's called polygamy, which just means one sex with several members of the other sex. The polygyny is one male and several female, right? Rather than
Yeah, one
polyandry, which
male.
is what
Yeah,
but
but
one several females. So all societies are either formally polygynous or they're clandestine. Richard Dawkins terms it clandestine polygyny. So obviously, if you're a high status male, first of all, you've got serial monogamy.
why
You can
is
have
it
5, 6, 7.
clandestine? I mean, what sense does that make culture, like, to evolutionarily to even prohibit it?
Well, if you don't have formal right, if you have polygynous societies, right, they don't exclude monogamy, right? Most polygynous societies, only about 5% of men actually are in polygynous relationships. Some of them have multiple, could have dozens of wives, right? Most other men are scrambling around and they have monogamous relationships. And then, of course, a lot of guys left high and dry and they're in bachelordom, right?
Most
In
people, I'm sorry,
that
but
that's in
yeah,
that let me finish.
yeah.
That's in formal polygynous societies. In societies that do not have formal polygamy, there's still polygamy because the high status guys, first of all, they have serial monogamy. So they monopolize a series of young females, right? They also have mistresses, they have affairs, they have multiple extra sex, one night stands, they might see prostitutes, all sorts of things. Of course, with contraception, the reproductive outcome from that is disguised, obviously, but it's basically the same thing. So all human societies are essentially polygynous, but that does not exclude monogamy. All societies are both polygynous and monogamous, and also with lots of bachelors. I stumped him.
It doesn't make any sense to me, because why would we prohibit
What?
this culturally? And I'm just not agreeing with you that we are living in a polygynous society. Like, maybe now, maybe, I mean, let's not talk about today, for example, but let's maybe talk about 100 years ago. I'm originally, my parents are from the Middle East, and there basically it's everybody gets married, and it has been in the West. It has been in the West like that 50 years ago. It has been the same, right? So
Doesn't make any difference.
wait,
You've still got
wait.
effective
So
polygamy.
but everybody reproduces, right? So there are basically almost no losers. No, wait.
No,
It is. Everybody gets
no,
married.
not everybody gets married.
But
There's always quite a
95%.
substantial minority. It'd be less than that actually. In no society, you've got 90%. There's a substantial proportion of males who never marry. There's quite a substantial proportion of females who never marry.
When?
But in all societies,
When?
in any culture, any point of history, look at the data today or 100 years ago, you
Yeah.
find that a substantial proportion of people don't marry.
What do you mean when you say substantial proportion?
Even if you have imposed monogamy quite strictly, and you outlaw polygamy, you still have de facto polygamy because, as I said, you have serial monogamy. You just divorce repeatedly. You've got mistresses, and there could be multiple mistresses. You can have affairs. You can have multiple affairs. You've got one night stands. You can have infinite numbers of virtually of one night stands. You can have lots of engagement with concubines, prostitutes, etc. There's so high status males will always, if they don't potentially, even if they don't actualize it, there always are potentially lots and lots of sex with lots and lots of partners, whereas most males do not have that opportunity.
Okay, can I
So you
just
have de facto polygamy in any social situation.
can I just draw you a picture and you tell me at what point I'm wrong and what I'm misunderstanding here? The way I saw it was that before we had basically, I don't know, before we had real civilization, we were like living like monkeys, and then I can imagine that there is like 30 to 30 20 to
completely wrong.
I haven't said anything yet.
You have.
We
You
never
made a
lived like
completely
monkeys.
bogus point. We never lived in a situation where we're like monkeys, and until you go back phylogenetically all the way back to monkeys, and monkeys aren't much different from us anyway.
Yeah, so okay, let's look at monkeys. Okay, you have a few alpha males that get most of the females, right? And then you have a majority that is like, maybe, I don't know, at least you have said it, like only 30 to 40% were reproducing, right? And the
100%.
yeah, and the remaining 60% was basically not even reproducing, right? So that was the status in nature, let's say, okay? And
which means obviously they weren't having sex because
yes,
there was
yes.
substantial natural contraceptive, but largely in the
Okay.
absence of our technology, that meant basically they were not having sex.
Okay. And then comes marriage, okay? Christianity comes along, Islam comes along, whatever.
You got it completely wrong. Marriage is just what we call a cultural codification of what's natural. There's pair bonding is what we should be talking about. That has always existed. It didn't suddenly magically arrive in some cultural context.
Yeah, but
marriage is just the cultural encoding.
Marriage is a pair bonding can be multiple partners, right? Like I can pair bond with 6 women, but marriage is defined that at least in Christianity, it's defined that I only can only have one wife. Right?
I think there's polygamy in Christian cultures as well. But as I've said, there's no society where
I'm not saying that there isn't, but I'm just saying that this number from 40% jumped at some point in history, jumped up to 80-90%.
No,
never did. Is that false? Is that fake news?
Well, it would have jumped beyond 40%, yes, but you still have a very large minority of males who didn't reproduce at all because of de facto polygamy.
I've been in pretty, like, even in my lifetime, I've been in pretty backward societies, quote unquote, in more traditional societies, conservative societies in the Middle East, and there everybody gets married. It's just the fact of the matter. There's just at some point there's everybody gets off the market. All the high value men get off the market, get married. Of course, they have their affairs. Of course, they have their mistresses. Of course, they have. There's all of this stuff is also going on. I don't disagree, but most people, like 90 to 95% of people, get married.
I think you'll find it's a lot less than 90%.
Okay, maybe it's 80.
And of course,
what's the number?
And of course, the other problem is that a lot of low status males, they may get to enter a pair bond, but they don't have offspring in that pair bond. The offspring of the pair bond are actually fathered by another male. If you look at the scientific studies now, we're talking of upwards of 30% non-paternity.
But they have sex.
Yeah, they have sex, but it doesn't mean that they're going to reproduce.
And it's way higher. It's way more men that are able to have sex and that get a partner than we had when there was no institution like marriage and basically no monogamy, right? It's significantly higher. I mean, we could say it's 70% or 80%, but
there's no evidence of that. No, there's no evidence of that.
Wait, there's no evidence for everybody getting married?
There's no special thing that this cultural thing of marriage. It's just a cultural codification of what was there anyway. It's just a label we put on it. Pair bonding is a biological evolved phenomenon. We've always pair bonded.
You said
there's nothing new in marriage.
You said 30 to 40% of men were only having sex before, right?
40% of men over the deep evolution of the phylogenetic history of the human species never reproduced.
Yes. So when we used to live like monkeys, that was the case, right? That was how it was.
We didn't live like monkeys. We lived like human beings. We've
You know
not
what I
changed
mean?
in that
You know what
time.
I mean, right? You know what I
No,
mean.
no,
Before we had
no,
before we had marriage, before we had civilization, before we had
no,
monogamy.
this civilization is just a term. We've always been civilized. Our social structures not changed significantly at all. This idea that there's some
So
big new change, it's just
monogamy.
not true.
Okay, so in the past, at some point X, the amount of men that were having sex was at 40%. And I, with
That's
my
that's
own
different.
eyes, have seen societies, and I'm pretty sure everybody watching can agree with me, that at some point in the not so distant past, 80 to 90% of men had sex.
Now you're backtracking. Now you're backtracking. Now you've
How
already
am I
come down
backtracking?
to halfway. Well,
I
you're
can't
saying
come
it's
down.
95%. You're
Okay,
now
okay,
down to
no, it's all
89.
right. I asked you many times. I said, okay, maybe it's 80% or 90%. You can tell me the number, but it's still double. Like, how is it from 40% to 8? Let's say 80. I'm even okay with 80. How
Yeah,
is it?
okay.
How
I
does
mean,
it make sense? Let me ask my question, please, because I had to take such a detour just to ask this simple question. Uh, how is it that evolutionarily it would make way more sense the way you described it? Why did we jump from 40% of males having sex to 80% of males having sex?
uh, well, first of all, if you look at data today, I think you'll find that about 30% of guys
Not
under
today.
40, I think you find it is.
Yeah, today,
It's still
yes, yeah, I
very
agree, but I'm
high.
not asking you about today. I'm asking you about 50 to 100 years ago. Now we're
But
getting
it's not.
basically back. Now we get basically
But it's
going
not
back
that
to the.
different, is it?
I
It's not
think
that
it is.
different, is it? I mean, if it changes by plus or minus 10% or plus or minus 20%, it's not affecting that. You're always going to get fluctuations for all sorts of
I
combined
feel like you
reasons
don't
in
want to answer
things.
my
The
question.
basic. No, I'm not answering it.
No, you're not. We don't want to answer my question. You agreed with me that in the past, at some point X, the the men having sex rate was at 40%. And then you agreed with me that in the not so distant past, the men having sex rate was at 80% at least.
First of all, the 40% is over the whole period of the phylogenetic history of the human race. It's obviously going to be varied at different points in
Yeah,
time.
it's an
There's
average.
no reason why it's going to be settled it's going to go up and down for a combination of all sorts of reasons. The
True.
basic truth is that there is a restriction of supply of sex, if you want to put it that way, that males experience. Uh, there's a substantial proportion of females don't have sex, but
Okay,
that's
now I'm
because
sure that you don't want to
uh,
answer my question.
they're very low in fertility.
Why is it in the fluctuation? Why does it go up and why does it go down? I mean, we know why it goes down, right? You've given us the explanation on why it goes down. It goes down because the you that's it was in your paper as well, I think, is that you have the large gamete that is basically only happening like you can only impregnate a woman once every 9 months, and so it makes sense that the it makes sense that she looks for her best reproduction strategy is to find the highest value man to reproduce, right? And for a man,
The reason for that is because there's a total different function according to sex. Uh, the fundamental problem in all biological systems is accumulated gene replication error, i.e., mutation, right?
yes,
So you need a mechanism to deal with it. Now, obviously, because females are already restricted in their reproductive capacity through which gestate and lactate, etc., you effectively have to quarantine the mechanism of doing that on the
yes,
male side of the lineage,
thank you.
right?
Yeah,
So
that's what I
that's why
meant.
we have a completely different function of male and female.
Yes,
But
yes.
what the
So
point you're
so
missing
then
is
it's
that
way better if we have the 30% of males that are only impregnating women, right? That's from an evolutionary standpoint, that's way better, right?
well, you got a gradation in different terms, aren't you? It's not just uh, you can have males that are having sex, but they're having much less of it, and with much lower fertility females. So you've got for all sorts of combined reasons, you've got a gradient from the high mate value males down to the low mate value males. So even if you haven't got a huge proportion of males not having sex at all, you've still got a very steep gradient. But the point you're missing is going back to what I said earlier. You have got in all cultures, including our own, in all points in history, talking as clandestine polygamy. So you have got this situation where it seems that you've apportioned male sexual access much more equally than actually it is, because not least because an awful lot of men are actually rearing children that aren't their own. They've actually been impregnated by an extra pair sex partner to their pair bond partner, and he doesn't know about it. The estimate now on data we've got around the world is that that's upwards of 30%, which is colossal. In
Okay,
medical schools, it's routinely taught it's 15%, but it's now thought that's only half of what it is. And that makes a massive,
then I'm
massive
just gonna
difference.
then I'm just gonna reformulate my question. Why did we make it clandestine? Why what was before done openly? Why at some point in history did it become clandestine for a man? Did it become socially punishable for a man to have multiple sex
Well,
partners?
there are always minor cultural variations. As I say, today in the world today, 85% of cultures practice formal polygamy. The ones that don't practice formal polygamy practice informal polygamy anyway. So the difference is not really here nor there. In fact, you could argue that because of the concentration of so much wealth in a narrow band of males in Western culture, that's a sort of a super signal to females of worth, and these males are actually well, they're not Genghis Khans, but there's a slice at the top slice of society now seems to have commandeer much more of the sexual access than a concomitant slice of the top of male society did in past societies. I mean, it was more narrow. There was just a few males at the top previously. We've got a fatter band now, but it's still apex males who are commandeering most of the action, as it were. So, I mean, it makes sense if you've got. I'll concede you this: if you've got human sociality is what we call fission fusion. So we've always had a situation where you've got various sized bands of people clubbing together, and obviously with the advent of cities and technology, you can have much more fusion and fission. You can have large cities, and you could argue that's created a much more of a control problem for controlling, the big thing in society, as we talked about, male access to sex. So you could argue that it made sense culturally to water down formal polygamy, so that at least there was a semblance of more equality amongst males. So you were to some extent placating the hordes, as it were, from revolting and overthrowing the elite. So there could be some obviously it does grow out of biology, but you could argue that has succeeded to an extent in, as you're talking about, uh, increasing the number of monogamous, monogynous relationships compared to what there might have been in the past. But the impact of that, because of all this clandestine, or the various ways you got clandestine polygamy, is not as great as that would seem.
I would like to make a evolutionary hypothesis. Since they're so great, they can never fail. It's I thought maybe I do one myself. Couldn't it be that the evolutionary reinforcement learning at some point understands that uh, it might be better from a genetic perspective to have this 30% of males that impregnate all of the females. That might be good from a genetic perspective, but since also we know that genetics, as far as I understand it, are also being modified from what we do in your behavior, and so what I'm doing is modifying my genes, and okay, maybe
No,
that's not true.
it's not.
Let's say it's not true, but still, for your offspring, what you want is survival, basically, because that's the most important thing.
No, survival is only instrumental to reproduction. What you need is reproductive efficiency. That is number times quality, and that to head down through the generations, not just F1 but F2, F3 into the future. That's what's crucial. That's the basic problem in society,
Wait, but
in
and
biology.
a man and a woman both want to reproduce and want to have children, not for humanity's sake, but for their own genes' sake, right? Isn't that our understanding?
It used to be with a selfish gene perspective, but now
Mm-hmm.
the whole group selection debate has collapsed. We now know
So
that you have
what
to
is it
look
now?
on a group. Well, the group selection debate is all dissolved. We now recognise that you have to look from a group level. This whole thing to do with dominance hierarchy and female cliques and controlling male sexual access, it doesn't make sense in individual terms. It makes sense in group terms. It's the whole local reproducing group that is the issue. So that the issue is, how do you make sure that your local group survives?
What do you mean when you
Uh,
say local group? Can you?
Whatever the geographically, politically, whatever constrained
What
group
size are
of
we talking?
effective. Well, it can vary, can't it? It can be a small band. It can be quite a huge group. It's going to vary. There's also different circumstances. It's going to vary. But the important thing is that group survives. Now, in
Oh yeah, yeah,
extremis,
yeah. Okay, okay.
when and so
Sorry.
in extremis, it could be that the environmental conditions are so serious that there is a major threat. The whole group's going to go extinct. What happens then is all you want is the alpha male and the queen bee of the top clique, just those two individuals to mate and produce the highest quality offspring in terms of quality times quantity, and use a minimum amount of resources in doing that. But because they are so much better in terms of genomic integrity than any other possible offspring, they are the best guarantee the group's going to survive. Now, obviously, that's an extremist. You can pull that down further down the group, so further proportions of the group actually do the same, but you restrict the bottom portions of your social group from reproducing at all. That will be optimum. What is not optimum is allowing all individuals everywhere to reproduce, because you're going to have that way. You do not ever purge from the gene pool deleterious genetic material. The whole name of the game in biology is to constantly battle to get rid of all this deleterious genetic material.
And what's the reason then for it jumping from 40% to 80%?
Well, first of all, as I say, I don't necessarily agree. This is
Okay,
monogamy.
so
Again,
you
you're not.
disagree with that. You disagree that
Uh,
that at some point it was at 40% males having sex, and then at
I
another
just said
later point it was at
40%.
80%. You disagree with that.
40% is an average across the whole of human
Okay,
phylogenetic
what was
history.
it?
It's going to vary quite enormously in different cultures, different
I mean,
times in
then it
history,
would be
at
even lower
different
than
points.
that, right? It would be 20%.
And also, it could be a lot higher than that. It's going to vary. I've just
Yeah, but the
explained that.
lower the better, right? Like if you go below a certain threshold, then obviously you can't go below because men can only impregnate so much women in a lifetime. But the lower you are, the better, right? Because you have a better selection. You just have the top
Well,
10%.
right, okay.
Yeah,
Right,
percentile.
as I've argued in my paper, I mean, theoretically, you can argue that you should restrict reproduction just to the alpha male and the top clique queen bee, right,
Yes.
and exclude everybody else from reproduction. Now,
No. No.
that's not going to work, because you're not going to get enough. You're not going to get enough. You need to produce quantity, not just quality.
Yeah,
You've
that's what I
got to
mean.
have
Yeah.
a fairly high. So you've got it in order to. Otherwise, you're going to lose out in competition to neighbouring groups. So you need to produce not just in quality, but in quantity to an extent as well. There's a
Yes.
balancing act between quantity and quality.
Yes.
But you
So
need the quality, otherwise you risk destroying the whole gene pool. If you
yes.
can't eliminate accumulated gene replication error
Yes.
by a large proportion of males being
Okay.
prevented from reproduction,
Okay.
you're going to be in trouble. But you do need a high proportion.
Let's imagine aliens come to our world and want to breed us. They would just take the biggest chat alpha male, right? They would take every day, they would take the maximum amount of sperm they can get from him, and then they would put it into all of the the highest quality, most fertile woman they can find on the planet, right? And then they would do this, and then but then they don't, like you said, they don't only want quality, they also want quantity, right? So because
Yeah.
so what do they do next? They take the second best high quality alpha chat, and then they go on with that, and at some point, okay, they come to a limit, wherever that limit is, but it's not, that limit is not at like 50% or 60%. It's probably because the discrepancy between the woman getting pregnant once every 9 months and a man basically being able to come five times a day, that discrepancy is so high that wouldn't allow for an optimal breeding mechanism. If all of a sudden 50% of males are being milked every day, that would not make any sense, right? It would probably be maximum 20% of, I didn't do the calculation, but we could probably do the calculation, and then we would not end up with like 50% of males being milked every day. It would probably be 10% or 20%, and you would be able to satisfy to impregnate all of the women on the planet, right?
Yeah, but going back to
So and then
going back to going back to the 40% thing,
can you
which is
just
an
say
average.
yes or no, and then I can, because I'm not done. Yeah, you agree, right? There will be like 15%, 20% of men being milked every day, and all of the women on the world would be pregnant. Okay, and
Yeah.
then all of a sudden, we look at this alien species, and then they start milking 60 to 70% of men, or 80% of men, and with that impregnating all women. And then we're like, why the fuck are they doing that? And that's the question I'm asking. That's what I'm not getting. Because I agree with your theories. I agree with that it makes more sense in a genetical way, but there is this question mark of why all of a sudden 70 to 80% of men are able to reproduce. Sorry, I went on a tangent, but I think you
Well,
got my.
as I said, your calculations out because keep repeating, you're not taking into account clandestine polygamy, and that skews male reproduction much more than you imagine by the if you want to call it liberalisation, where more men are mating monogamously, because it's the actual reproductive output in terms of quality time quantity time times quality is not what you'd imagine from the headline stat of that. It's skewed. The factor which I should have mentioned, which actually does feature in here, of course, is that the other consideration is that you have got neighbouring groups. Now, if you do go through some sort of technological revolution, obviously farming comes in here, and you're able to actually have cities, then you do need to reproduce in number uh, as well as quality, because otherwise you're going to be outcompeted by a neighbouring city group just through sheer numbers. So that could factor into uh, uh, why, although you've got an average, we don't know over the phylogenetic history when it dipped down and when it went up. But so that could factor into what you're saying, that you have got an effective larger proportion of males
But it's
reproducing
not
for
about
that
number.
reason.
It's not about number, because with 20% of males, we can already impregnate all of the women on the
No,
planet.
it is about if you're talking about uh, conflict between neighbouring groups. If you've suddenly got a problem where you need a sizable population, because the carrying capacity of your local environment is much bigger because you're farming it rather than just hunter gathering. If you're farming it, and your effective population levels increase, but your neighbouring groups have got the same benefit. So if you're not reproducing in sufficient number, never mind the quality, you're going to lose out in meteor rates, and your group's going to go extinct.
But increasing
So
the amount of men that have sex is not increasing the amount of pregnant women.
It is because the problem being, I've discussed this in one of my papers. The problem is that there's a limit to the efficiency of reproducing when you have a tightly restricted number of men and women, because obviously it means a lot longer uh, time period between women getting pregnant. It's just there's going to be some efficiency consideration whereby this is why you've got uh, a wider number, larger number of polygynous males rather than just the one or two alphas, and why you actually draw it down into a wider echelon of the male population. Overall, it's more efficient to do that. From the women's point of view, in that they can much more easily, more frequently. It's a trade-off, between quantity and quality. Obviously, there's not much point totally focusing on quality if you've got no quantity of your offspring. You need to have both.